Okay, everybody. Hey, hello. Once again, this is Micah Lieberman with Scope doing a fun Voices of Scope video. This is always the best part of my day where I get to just talk to our faculty, our speakers, friends, technologists, investors, whoever, anybody doing something interesting in clinical research. So today I have Dr. Kevin Bugin. He was with me on stage at a Scope keynote a few years back. He was with FDA at the time. That was a while ago. He is now currently head of regulatory policy and intelligence at Amgen, still doing interesting work. And also, he's continuing some of what we originally started discussing at Scope US quite a while ago at Scope X in May in Boston, May 18th and 19th. Kevin, you're running a panel kind of talking about navigating the AI era, and it's got a bunch of you and friends and colleagues from FDA talking about this. So, Kevin, here's the setup. So, lots of talk about AI, given. Okay. At Scope and out in the world, we're talking about how healthcare authorities are going to regulate AI. Now, further than that, something that you're talking about is, well, how are regulatory authorities going to use AI? And you have a unique perspective. So I just want to set that up talking about, kind of AI and regulatory review and decision making is a big setup. So take it where you will, and we'll kind of lead into the panel in May.
Thanks, Micah. Yeah, this is always good to be with you. I still remember fondly that keynote experience a few years back.
It was great.
So it was. Scope was quite the fun experience. Now, yeah, I mean, we had a Scope US panel conversation about this, a couple months ago, and basically there we were talking about how AI is being used in clinical development or in drug development more broadly, and particularly what is FDA or EMA, the health authorities, how are they viewing industry or sponsors use, and they'd say in CROs as well, use of AI. But what I'd really like to talk about in this upcoming panel is what about health authorities? Because AI is one of those ubiquitous tools that we all should be tapping into to make our lives a little bit more efficient, give us, the ability to spend more time being strategic, really thinking about the work that's in front of us. And health authorities are humans too, right? As a former health authority regulator from FDA, I can say absolutely that there are probably hundreds of use cases for where AI can help in their day-to-day work. And I think the principles that have been laid out for how sponsors should be using AI would apply as well to the FDA. And I think we just need to think through them a little bit more carefully. So, for example, how are we sure that as FDA builds these new tools, that the data they use and the purposes that they build these tools for are clear and transparent? Because I think as a service to the public, these tools that they build are something that we should have that level of transparency and access into. Furthermore, there are some unique properties associated with the data that FDA might be using to train its tools. This is data that's coming from development programs. It might be commercial, confidential, or proprietary information. It could even have patient, identifying information in it. And it's not to say that you couldn't use those data, but there are some additional safeguards that we would have to think about to make sure that that data is used in sort of reliable and trustworthy sorts of ways. And I'm not laying these things out as saying like this is why we shouldn't have our health authorities use AI, but just as things we need to be thinking about and maybe collaborating with our partners and the health authorities to build these AI tools sort of in a way together. There are also real disadvantages to maybe not using some of these tools. For example, there's talk of competitiveness, and I think health authorities in different parts of the world may have access to different tools, and they may start to open up to different approaches to how we can accelerate clinical development or drug development using AI. For example, maybe certain health authorities are more open to creating synthetic controls or digital twins, leveraging data that's come in from multiple drug development programs that the health authority can see within the confines of their, firewalls and things inside of their agencies. But if that's happening in certain regions, but not all regions, suddenly you have this problem where drug development can split or bifurcate often in different directions. And ideally we're all working sort of together, utilizing all these tools in the most appropriate manners as we can.
Okay, here's a question because you mentioned a couple interesting things. There's so much excitement, right? And then at the same time, coming just kind of fresh out of scope where you have the minds who know and the people who do, there is an equal amount of excitement, but there's also a certain amount of like, hey, how do we kind of put safeguards on this? It's not risk aversion, it's an intelligent approach. This is a really new space. So you mentioned also like, hey, this is not prescribed. This is a collaborative approach. These tools are new, they're changing. So what would that collaboration look like? I mean, this is a kind of a naive question. What would it actually look like between the sponsor world and the FDA? Because it doesn't matter where you are. If you're a CRO, if you're a sponsor biotech, sometimes, and I've learned this because I work with a lot of experts, people sometimes think that they're the only one who doesn't know that thing. Like, and they feel like, okay, I don't want to divulge that me, Micah from sponsor X, might be behind on this tool or something. They don't, but it turns out everybody feels the same. But nobody wants to raise their hand first and say, hey, I'm willing to say, these are things I want to do. These are the tools I have. Here's what I'm allowed to do. How do I put this together to kind of create more value for me, for everybody, without giving up any intellectual property? I think that's absolutely doable. What does collaboration actually look like, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's transparency, it's communication. I fully understand what you're saying, and I totally understand that there's an industry out there supporting, the pharmaceutical development industry, and that there is real, value in the ability to create these new proprietary tools to help support and accelerate drug development.
Hmm.
And it's not like it's easy and free to create these new things. If it was, we'd all have done it already, and
Yeah.
drug development would be 100x faster, but that's not the case. There's sort of the need to have kind of like that intellectual property protected. And so I think we wouldn't expect that either the health authorities or different members of industry to share those proprietary algorithms, but there could be access to explanations and sort of the process by which they were created. And this is like very common actually in the programming and coding world, where you could place a lot of that information on the GitHub. You just still need the
Right.
know-how, and then you'd have to go and work it yourself, but you could recreate that. It's very much about the transparency that can create the retrospective trust in these different tools. And again, I think this is where health authorities also are probably going to see that this is an opportunity for them as well, because they're almost their own little niche. And, you know,
Yes.
um, they're like, you can't really talk to others unless they're a health authority. It's like a unique little, like, secondary citizenship, if you will, where like
Yeah.
maybe I can talk to my friends across the pond because they're also a health authority. They know what I'm dealing with every day.
Right.
And so we can create those forums for them to have these conversations. And ideally, I think that there's room for industry to join those as well. I think the last thing we want is, health authorities to maybe build some of these tools, and then there's a question about how they are used, and suddenly that sort of like dismantles all the trust and all the AI
Right.
tools, and then everything just shuts down. Like that would
Right.
be the worst case scenario.
Okay, that's a good answer. And I think there is a process there. We all know a lot of us in that scope at this have been involved in pre-competitive collaboration in different forms or hackathons. There's all different approaches to doing it, but I think you said it accurately. I mean, I think from the beginning saying, what are we doing? What can we do together? And being transparent about it. And there's multiple steps there. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, so one more thing. I know we're kind of running low on time. We talked, there's there's various use cases. We can't mention them all where, and this will be discussed in depth at the panel in May probably. But there are some opportunities and there are some risks for regulators using AI and not using AI. Are there any things that you think are coming up, and what are you hearing? Are there any obvious ones that are going to be the earlier use cases?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think there are more what I'd say are administrative use cases
Mhm.
where health authorities have published, like, here are the requirements of a dossier to submit a particular type of application. They can build automated checks for those things so that their review staff don't have to spend time making sure all the different pieces were submitted. A lot of that's already built in many of the more modern submission platforms, but they could further develop those and
Okay.
leverage some AI tools. At the same time, why couldn't those be shared with industry so that when we're putting together our dossiers, we can do those checks ourselves? Ultimately, higher quality submissions, more efficient filings. These are great things, and they're low risk because the tools, sort of the fundamental or foundational knowledge, is already available and it's public. It doesn't require that proprietary knowledge. You're not worried about sensitivities. As you sort of step into some of that additional data that you might need to train the tools, where it might be more proprietary, and again, not impossible. You just have additional guardrails and things to think about. That's where I think we'll slowly get there, but it'll take a bit more time.
Yeah. Good example. I like that. All right, Kevin, I know it was fast and furious, but this was good. We'll do a lot more, obviously, in Boston in May, again in Scope Europe in October, Scope US. I mean, that's our small part, but there's a whole bunch of other people out there in the world like you at FDA, elsewhere, all working on this together. It's an exciting time. Yep.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin.
Great talking to you.